Well, first off, I gotta apologize for wearing shorts. I was in a little bit of a rush, but I do kind of feel like it's a little bit in honor of Labor Day, so I'm just kind of taking a break from jeans. But the good thing is if you start to fall asleep, my legs should hopefully get your attention again. My whiteness in my legs. So anyway, hey, we are tonight we're doing things a little bit differently. We're actually going to be looking at a passage in 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19, so if you got your Bibles or taking notes, that's where we're going to be in. But to sort of set this up and to kind of give this story some context, we're going to go back all the way to the year 2002. 2002. And some of you are like, I really thought the Bible was older than that. It is, but stick with me. See, in 2002, was the year that the first Bourne Identity movie was released. I don't remember anyone watched. How many watched the first Bourne Identity? Hopefully you have. Otherwise, it could be a spoiler alert on some of the stuff. But it was the first one. It kind of sparked this series of a whole bunch of other Bourne movies. I think there's like Bourne Supremacy, Bourne A Good Day Off, Bourne, a whole bunch of them. But the Bourne Identity, it was the first one. It was the one that sort of set the stage for it all. In particular, there was one scene that really kind of set the stage of really where all the movies to follow would ultimately go. And so I want you to kind of take a look at this clip. And this is the scene here. He kind of first discovers who he thinks he is. He shows up to this bank deposit box and he starts to open it up and gets a clue a little bit about his identity. So take a look at this. Makes you want to go home and like binge watch all 600 Jason Bourne movies tonight, right? But hey, I share that with you because I think that's a picture of a lot of our lives. It's a picture of a lot of our lives. Now, grant you, minus the whole secret agent, assassin side of things. Hopefully, though, I mean, really, Dave's got some pretty quick reflexes. I mean, how much do we really know about Dave? Old Jason Bourne in you, but it's a picture of, I think, a lot of us, because how many of us, like Jason Bourne, sort of find ourselves constantly on the run in life. Constantly on the run in life, chasing after people, chasing after stuff, chasing after answers to the very same thing that sent Jason Bourne searching, Jason Bourne running for his life in so many ways. And it was the same thing that sent him running, that again sends so many of us running. It's this uncertainty and insecurity around our identity. This uncertainty and insecurity around our identity, that question that we all ask in our lives of who am I really? Who am I really? And like Jason Bourne, how many of us, when it comes to sort of finding the answers to that question, we oftentimes start in the same place that he started. but by trying to search and find it somewhere out there, or in something out there. It's in the college student who says, I'm just taking time to sort of find myself. Or it's in the father who never has time for his family, but always has time for work because he's trying to find himself, trying to find his identity in success or in an achievement. But listen, what we're going to discover, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks in dealing with these topics of identity and insecurity is that listen, true identity is not found somewhere out there. It's not found in the opinions of others, even in your opinion of yourself. But our true identity is found in God, and specifically it's found in Christ. Our true identity is found in Christ. Because, and which kind of brings us to the passage that we're going to be looking at in 1 Kings 19. Because in 1 Kings 19, we're going to read of a story of a guy who's going to kind of help us sort of pack kind of the roots and some of this, what this looks like when we're running in life or running in insecurity. And it's a story of a guy by the name of Elijah. And Elijah was sort of the original Jason Bourne. In fact, when we catch up to him in this passage, he's fresh off of taking down 400 of the prophets of Baal in this epic grill-off that ended up turning into this, either winning the battle, winning the cook-off, and ended up wiping out the prophets of Baal. And that's when we catch up to this story. Because a word of this victory, a word of this Jason Bourne moment from Elijah makes its way to Ahab, and specifically makes its way to Ahab's wife, his evil wife, Jezebel, who's the ruler of the town. She's not the nicest of all ladies. And so this is where we catch up to in 1 Kings 19:1. It says, now Ahab told his wife Jezebel everything. That's what we guys do. We tell our wives everything, hopefully. That Elijah had done, and now he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. What she's saying there is, hey, basically, within 24 hours, it's just like the prophets of Baal, all my prophets are gone and they're dead. That's the same destiny that I'm going to make sure is in front of you. I'm going to make sure you end up the same way. And so Elijah, in response, he does what so many of us do. What so many of us do in the face of fear. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he runs. In fact, in verse 3, it says that. It says, Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. He ran for his life. In fact, in psychology, they call this fight or flight. It's the two most common responses you and I have to fears in our life, right? In fact, it's actually how we're physiologically wired, where when there's a perceived danger, our limbic system kind of goes into action, starts dropping incredible amounts of adrenaline into our systems, and elicits this fight or flight response. This response where you're either going to punch somebody or you're going to run, or you're going to punch somebody and then run. It's that response of fight or flight, right? In fact, I always tell people, listen, if you ever see me running, you need to know, don't think in your mind that, oh, pastor's just trying to get into shape, or pastor's running, to get better health. Listen, if you ever see me running, it's for help. You need to actually call 911, because the only reason I'm running is because somebody's chasing me. Somebody's got a knife, or there's a tsunami coming, and you need to be headed to the high ground, right? And so that's what Elijah's doing here. He's literally running for his life. And side detail too, when you really look through the story, we discover he makes really good time, like super fast. Trying to get away from this fear, trying to get away from this situation, because how many know there's running and then there's running in fear? Like I may look kind of slow right now, but if you put me like in a carnival house or a haunted house with a bunch of clowns, like I can run. I can run as fast as anybody. And so Elijah, he's running for his life, he's sprinting for his life, and I kind of love that phrase too, where it says this ideal kind of running for our life, because I think in many ways when you really get down to it, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's a little bit of a misnomer to say you're running for your life, because truth is, when we're running for our lives, we're not really running for life, right? We're actually not running for anything as much as we're running from something. We're running from death. We're running from the fear. And I think especially when you talk about this concept of insecurity, oftentimes that's exactly what it does. That's oftentimes how it kind of formulates and comes out in our lives. It's like we might think we're running for friendship, but when we're in insecurity, truth is we're really running out of a fear of rejection. We might think we're running for significance, but really how many of us are running out of a fear of disappointment? And listen, can I tell you, when you're in that cycle of insecurity, just sort of running for your life, running from stuff, running from the past, running from a fear of rejection, running from a fear of pain, can I tell you, that's an exhausting way to live. That's a tiring way to live. This place where it feels like the more we run, it feels like we just keep spinning our wheels. In fact, in the Bible, when it talks about this kind of cycle of insecurity that sometimes we get stuck in, it describes it as the fear of man. The fear of man. In fact, Proverbs 20:25 speaks about this. The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. In other words, again, when we live out of the fear of man, it's this running, but never feeling like we're getting anywhere. You ever felt like that in life? Where it doesn't seem to matter how fast you run, how hard you work, how much you do. It never feels like it's ever enough for others, ever enough for you. And yet on the flip side, the Bible speaks of a life driven not from a fear of man, but out of a fear of God. Out of a fear of God. And I know sometimes we think about this, like, well, wait a second, man, the fear of God, sometimes we can kind of think of it in terms of like this paralyzing thing, where like, God's up there just waiting for us to make a mistake. He's going to zap us with this lightning bolt and just do away with us. But when the Bible talks about the fear of God, having the fear of God instead of the fear of man, the word fear there in relation to fear of God is this Hebrew word called yirah, which is literally to revere. It's to revere. It's to set your focus, to set your attention, to concern yourself more with what God thinks about you than what other people think about you. And listen, this is so important because somewhere along the line, when we look at Elijah's story, he gets us mixed up. He gets us mixed up, and he, instead of running out of a fear of God, out of a reverence for God, out of paying more attention to what God thinks, he starts to shift his focus to what other people think. And listen, I'm telling you what, this is so important, because listen, you want to know the best way to forget what God thinks about you? Is actually to constantly focus on what other people think about you. It's constantly be consumed with other people's opinions about you, what other people think about you, what other people say about you. And listen, when we live our lives dominated by this fear of man, this snare that the Bible calls it, running for the approval of people, trying to get our props and our acceptance and our affirmation from people, when you do that, when you spend your life on the run, it's not just that you're running. It's that you're running the wrong race. And you're running for the wrong reasons. And that's exactly what's going on with Elijah. Because something you've got to understand about Elijah is this isn't the first time that Elijah ran for his life. In fact, Elijah was sort of the first Prefontaine before there was Prefontaine. He was a guy who had like all the latest Nike apparel and Nike gear that he would have had it in his closet. Because before chapter 19 was chapter 18. And we see Elijah kind of running, but this time, instead of running from something, he's actually really running for something. Instead of living this life driven by fear of man, he's living a life driven by this fear of God, this reverence for God. And so in chapter 18, when everything sort of kind of goes down at Mount Carmel between this battle of the prophets of Baal and Elijah himself, and when it kind of comes out of it, the whole kind of point of the battle, the whole point of kind of why they had this grill-off was that basically Elijah was calling the nation of Israel to return back to seeking God, to have a fear of God rather than the fear of these man-made idols, these man-made creations. He's like, no, we need to return back to God, making God the focus. And part of the reason that kind of sets the scene and what even led to this in the first first place was that they were in the middle, basically, or I should say not in the middle, but on the heels of basically a 3-year drought. And so they were getting desperate. And so the prophets of Baal are praying for fire that would hopefully symbolize and be reflective of a coming rain. And of course they lost, and Elijah won, and the God of Israel stood out. And eventually Elijah, at the end of this, he's like, I'm just telling you, rain is on the way. Rain is on the way. And so he tells the king Ahab, he's like, I'm just telling you, that God, because our nation's turning back to God, the floodgates of heaven are going to be open. Rain is coming. And I'm just telling you, because we're at the heels of a 3-year drought, when that rain comes, you can expect some flash flooding. I mean, anyone ever been to Arizona? When it rains and then it hits that dry ground, oftentimes it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it creates a lot of flooding. And so the king Ahab, he starts to ride back. He heads back to town. He heads back to the palace, heads back to this place called Jezreel, which we're going to come back to. It has significance there. And Elijah also starts to head back there. But whereas King Ahab, he starts running. He doesn't actually run himself. He actually just hops on his chariot, his nice fancy chariot with these brand new horses, and he just starts taking off there. Elijah, he just puts his Nikes on, and he starts running. And any guesses of who actually makes it to Jezreel first? Elijah. It's this amazing thing. Elijah, he starts running and is able to outrun King Ahab with all of his horses, all of his chariots. And what's interesting is that when he does this, he outruns the horses, which is pretty amazing. But not just that. He outruns them, and it's like he doesn't even break a sweat. Like he gets there, which is amazing to me, because I'll just walk down the stairs to get a cup of milk, and I'm like, man, these stairs, this is too much. I'm worn out, and yet here's Elijah. I mean, he's run miles, and hasn't even broken a sweat. He's not tired at all. And you can't help but ask when you read the story, why? How could this be? And really the only answer is because the hand of God was on his life. The hand of God was on his life. And listen, you need to know something. The hand of God is on your life as well. When you do what God calls you to do, when you're running the race God has called you to run, you can trust that God's hand is on you. And it's why Paul said, let us lay aside the sin and the weight that so easily besets us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. In other words, it means that you and I, we've got a race to run. See, the problem isn't in the running. The problem is the motivation behind the running. The problem is, why are we running in life? Listen, you and I, we've got a race to run. You've got a race to run. But I can tell you that my race isn't the same as your race. And your race isn't the same as my race. I'm not called to run your race. God's hand, though, is on my life. God's hand is on your life to run the race that he lays out for you. See, I'm anointed to do what God has called me to do. I'm empowered to do what God has called me to do. I'm strengthened to do what God has called me to do. And the same works for your life as well. See, when God gives you the grace to do a thing, to accomplish a thing, to live a certain life, you can do stuff other people can't do when you're running the race you're called to run. I think of it kind of with my wife. Every once in a while, it's we'll need something maybe for a camping trip or a purchase that we just honestly maybe in that moment we don't really have the finances to actually make that purchase. And yet God has really gifted my wife with the ability to find amazing deals. To really find blessing where it seems like, man, I'm looking at the bank statement there's no way we don't have the money for this. And yet God's gifted her. In fact, and so much so like she can go to a Goodwill store, and she can be in that Goodwill store for 8 hours. And yet in the process of that, at the end of the 8 hours, she'll come out with a brand new mini fridge, for $10. And all because and she's not tired, she's not exhausted, she's not worn out. Now me on the other hand, just pulling up to the Goodwill, I see the Goodwill sign and I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm I can't do it. I can't do it, right? Because she's running a race. She's walking in a gift mix that she's called to walk in, to run. And listen, I just wonder, for some of us, the reason we feel so exhausted, we feel so tired when it comes to life, and when it comes to maybe ministry, when it comes to just doing stuff, could it be that we're running a race we were never called to run? Or instead of running the race that God has called us to run, we instead run the race that we think other people want us to run, or other people tell us we should run. And this is important for us to get, because I think, if we're honest, one of the hardest things when it comes to insecurity, and I think if you have any insecurity in your life, you can probably relate to this. I think one of the hardest things for an insecure person to say is the word no, right? Is just say no. Like when you get asked to do something, because listen, if I'm a people pleaser, if I have this fear of man that drives my life, if I live for the approval of others, I need you to like me, I need you to need me, I need you to want me. Sounds like a good 80s song. And so my tendency is that I'm going to take on responsibilities that aren't even really mine. I'm going to step into areas that I'm not really even called to. I'm going to run races that I was never meant to run because I'm insecure. I struggle to say no. So I've got things on my calendar that were never supposed to be on my calendar. And then I'll complain about my calendar. Even though everything that got on my calendar got there because I said yes to it, right? And yeah, it's amazing how many of us will, I'm so tired, I'm so overwhelmed, my schedule is just beyond me. Listen, there's nothing in my life that I didn't let in my life. There's nothing that got on my calendar that at some point I didn't okay. And if I'm insecure, I okay everything because I can't say no to anything. And so now I'm running races I was never meant to run, and I'm worn out and I'm exhausted. And that's what's going on with Elijah. I mean, Elijah, in fact, we see this in verse 14. Here's a guy who he just couldn't say no. He thought that the race he was supposed to run was to run it all. And so he's worn out, he's exhausted. And check this out, verse 14. He says, I've been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. In other words, I've just been so busy. I've been so busy. I've been doing all this stuff. And he goes on and says, I've been zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Somebody sing me a sad song, right? So tired. So worn out. This overmatched schedule. Running a race he was never called to run. And so now he's at this point where he's like, I'm done. It's over. He's sitting under a broom bush, which, just in case you're wondering what a broom bush is, it was actually what its name really was. It's the kind of bush they would use to literally make brooms out in that day and time. And so verse 19, or actually verse 5 in chapter 19, it goes on and says, then he lay down under the bush, he fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him. I tend to think it was probably more like a little subtle kick, or as my wife, when she wants to get my attention, calls it a love tap. But she'll like, oh, punch me in the arm. That's kind of what's going on here. It's like, hey, you just imagine God's like, Elijah, come on, wake up. And he says, get up and eat. And continues on, it says, he looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water, and he ate and drank, and then continues on, it says, strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? Or what are you doing here? By the way, I think it's pretty cool that when you notice when God seems to really show up the most in his life is when if you notice when Elijah actually kind of reached the end of himself. When he was exhausted, when he was as low as he seemingly could go, as far as he seemingly could get. It's at this place where he gets to the end of himself that God seems to start to work the most. That's why the psalmist says, be still and know that I'm God, because I found that at the end of our running, when we get to this place where I can run no more, that seems like that's the place that God seems to show up the most. Because here's the thing, and this is really the key thought of what you got to get for this. This really makes sense to you. When it comes to really finding the cure for insecurity, overcoming insecurity in our lives, rather than just running from fears of rejection, fears of the approval of others, living in the fear of man, and actually running the race out of a fear of God, a reverence for God, an audience of one rather than an audience of many. You got to get this. And that's when it comes to the problem with insecurity. Listen, the problem with insecurity is not a lack of confidence, but misplaced confidence. It's not a lack of confidence, but misplaced confidence. Elijah had plenty of confidence. I mean, it takes confidence to sign up to be a part of a live episode of Hell's Kitchen and take on 400 really qualified cooks and come out on top. Like it takes some confidence to tell a nation in a nation that was set out to do you in. Hey, you need to repent. You need to turn back to God. It takes some confidence. He had confidence. So the problem wasn't confidence. So the problem wasn't that he needed more skill, more ability, or if I just could get a little more of this. The problem wasn't that he lacked confidence. The problem was that his confidence had gotten misplaced. In fact, we see this in his response to God. 1 Kings 19:10, again, going back to it, he says, I have been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. Again, notice what his confidence is in. It's in me. It knows that I have been. I am the only one. I did this. I did that. I accomplished that. Notice where the root of his confidence is. It's all about me. It's all about what I can do. And it's to that. This is where God's response really starts to kind of speak to us and really challenge us. Because it's in the light of that, of here, Elijah on the run because not a lack of confidence, because of misplaced confidence. Thinking I can handle what I can do. That God shows up and he's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Which is an incredibly important question. And to really understand the depths of this question, you've got to understand where Elijah came from. See, before he got to there, God was asking, what are you doing here? The there that Elijah was, it was Mount Horeb, otherwise known as Mount Sinai. But where he came from was a place called Jezreel. Now, Jezreel is actually, the definition of it in Hebrew literally means God sows. God sows, which is such a powerful image. This idea that God sows, and the extrapolation that as God sows and I reap. Right? And so God, in fact, actually, throughout the Old Testament, in fact, even Jesus himself says you'll reap a harvest that you did not sow. You did not plant. And see, Jezreel, this place he came from, in fact, in the very literal sense, Jezreel was a very fertile valley, and the people of Israel at that time, when they first even stepped into the promised land, when they got to Jezreel, the beauty of Jezreel was that it was already pretty done. Like they didn't have to run ditches, they didn't have to do a bunch of different methodologies to kind of turn this arid place into a place of production. It was already flourishing. God had already blessed it. God had already provided within it. And I love the picture of it because really what it is a picture of grace, isn't it? It's a picture of God's grace. This grace where I don't get what I deserve, I get what God deserved, what Jesus deserved. See, grace, it's a message of the very Gospels that Jesus sowed seeds in you and I. Because of that, we get to reap the fruit. We get to reap the blessing. We get to reap the harvest. It's that God did the work when he said on the cross, when Jesus went to it and said, it is finished. What he meant is every seed has been sown. The seeds of your healing have been sown. The seeds of your redemption have been sown. The seeds of your forgiveness have been sown. I sowed the seeds, and now all you've got to do is just receive the harvest. It's grace. In fact, I share this forward back. The very definition of grace is when you receive not what you deserve. When you receive not what you deserve, but what you need when you need it the most. And that's really what's happening here. See, he's speaking of this place, he's really speaking of this place of grace rather than a place of works. And yet, then comes this question. So, We have Elijah. He leaves this place of grace where God does the work. His grace is sufficient. He leaves Jezreel, the place that God sows, and he goes to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. Now, what's Mount Sinai known for? It's where the nation of Israel got the law of God, the Ten Commandments. And I love it because what we see is we see this contrast. We see this picture of God's grace in Jezreel. And Jezreel is a picture of God's grace. And in Horeb, we see a picture of God's law. And as a result, and because of this, we got God sitting there saying, again, Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Why would you leave the place of grace, the place where I sowed? All you got to do is just reap the benefits, reap the blessings, reap the encouragement, reap the joy. And yet now all of a sudden you're in this place of Horeb, you're in the place of the law, this place where you're under this belief and this false idea that somehow I've got to do this to get God to love me, get God to accept me. In fact, some of you, this is your very view of God. If I don't do this, then God won't do that. If I don't act this way, then God, surely He can't love me, He can't receive me, He can't accept me that way. And so he shows up to Elijah, and again, it speaks this question of, what are you doing here? And listen, that's really my question for some of you tonight. Is if you're in a place in your life where you just feel like you're running and running and running, you just feel like you're on this cycle that never seems to end. Whatever you do just never seems to feel like it's never enough. I don't feel like I'm ever enough. I don't feel like it's ever enough for people around me. Listen, could it be because you're living in a place you were never meant to live? Could it be that instead of living in the place of Jezreel, living in the place of God's grace, you've chosen maybe very dramatically, maybe just really subtly, you've drifted to Mount Horeb, the place of God's law, that somehow you thought that God's grace for you, God's purpose for you, God's plans for you, your identity was all about what you do, about your best efforts, your work, what you accomplish, what you achieve. But listen, I think one of the best questions you can ask tonight, when you look at your life, is what are you doing here? Like when you look at all the running and you look at all the busyness, well, what's the motivation? Is it fear of man? Are you running because you're afraid of being rejected? You're afraid of being disappointed? Or is it fear of God? We're running with this sense of this sense of knowing that God loves me, God accepts me. There's nothing I can do to make God love me any more, any less than He does right now. And in fact, this is kind of God's really encouragement. This is the turning point. This is where Elijah begins to step away from insecurity, back into the place of being secure and knowing who he is in God. And it starts with this instruction. God gives him two kind of quick instructions that we're just going to kind of wrap up with and kind of bring this to a close. And the first instruction really he just tells him he just simply tells him to go back. He tells him, hey, go back the way you came. Go back the way you came, Elijah. I love that. Anyone ever lost their keys? You know how that feels, right? There's this stress, anxiety of like, man, I lost it, right? And inevitably, whenever I lose my keys, my wife will always tell me, any guesses of what's the first thing she tells me to do?
Where were you last?
Yeah, go back to where you saw it last. Go back to where you experienced it last. And that's really what God is instructing Elijah. Like, Elijah, no. Part of the reason you're so tired and you're so worn out and you feel like giving up is you're running a race you were never meant to run. It's not about doing what you can do in your strength. It's about living from a place of my strength and my grace and my sufficiency. And so he calls him to turn. He calls him to go back. Go back to the place where you find confidence. where you find courage, where you find strength, where you find encouragement. Go back to Jezreel. Go back to the place. And I love that phrase that God sows. Because how many know if you're going to reap something that someone has sown, it's going to take time, right? And so when you're calling him back to Jezreel, calling him back to this place where God sows, what he's doing is he's calling him back. Hey, he's calling him to return to him. It takes some time to go back to the place where you're just spending some time with God. Listen, those, especially if you're just feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, listen, when was the last time you just stopped? And you just got in that place of Jezreel, and you just spent some time with God. You really spent some time in His Word. You really spent some time seeking Him in prayer. It's amazing how many times people will be like, man, I don't know what to do, and I just feel so overwhelmed, and I just see it seems like there's no way out. And ask them, well, have you sought God? Did you actually open up the Word of God, read the Bible? No, just too busy. Listen, could it be the reason so many of us just feel like we're running for our life and exhausted and ready to quit on our jobs, maybe quit on a call that God's put on our life or a dream God's put on our life, is because of this. It's because we're not taking the time. Listen, there's some things, there's some blessings that God wants to pull out in your life, wants to pour into your life, wants to grow through your life. That, listen, it takes time for that to happen. It takes time. There's some encouragement. There's some blessing that you can only reap and only experience through time in His Word and time in prayer and time in a place like this, just worshiping Him and seeking Him. Listen, don't live your life exhausted and ready to quit and hoard. Some of you, God's calling you back to Jezreel, the place where you trust and you lean on His grace. Because it's in Jezreel that where we learn to live from what God gave us. Where we learn to live from His grace. We learn to live from His mercy. We learn to live from His strength. We learn to live from His love for us. And here's the beauty, and it's almost this kind of weird paradox, is that when you and I do that, when we answer the call to return to Jezreel, we could try to do it on our own and quit living out of this fear of man and living for a fear of God. What you find is this result of this tendency, this desire to live for also what you can give to others. To live for what you can give to others. Listen, you want to break from insecurity. Listen, you got to live from what God gave you, but also it ultimately results in living for what you can give to others too. And I get the question like, well, wait a second. This wasn't about a race of trying to, please people or something. It's not. But the Bible puts it this way. It says, freely you have received, not freely give. Part of the reason some of us, we struggle to really give. Where we struggle like, man, when we see that person at work, it's like, man, I know I need to take some time. I need to talk with them and listen. Part of the reason we struggle to give in that way and give that time and give that attention is because, again, we're trying to do it in our own strength. We're trying to do it from a place of Mount Horeb, a place from God's law. We're trying to do it to seek approval or seek, seek affection or seek love. But God says, no. The only way you can really give in a way that's really going to impact this world, really going to change. Listen, you want to know if you're starting to break out that cycle of insecurity is when you live from the place of Jezreel, the place of God's grace. When you know just how loved and how blessed you are. In fact, I like how Paul puts it. He says, but you are chosen. Actually, Peter puts it. He says, in 1 Peter, it says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. I love the fact that he says you are. You are. That's who you are. It's not what other people think about you. It's not what other people say about you. Not even what you say about yourself. That's who you are. And listen, when you come to learn that, when you come to really receive that, as a result, you're able to Actually, when he goes on later in that verse, talks about being a light in the world. You're able to shine a light. You're able to really give and to really, truly, freely give of yourself, of your time, of your talents. I want to pray for you tonight, and that's really my prayer for you. It's a pretty simple message in many ways. But I think it can be, for some of you, a real turning point. Because for some of you, I really believe maybe you came in this place. And you came in exhausted, you came in tired, and you can really relate to Elijah. In the face of maybe really difficult circumstance at home, or in a job, or at work, or just in life, you just feel overwhelmed and you feel exhausted. Well, then listen, could it be that God brought you here to really ask you that simple question, okay, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Like, what's driving the schedule that you're trying to keep? What's driving this need to keep seeking approval and seeking acceptance from maybe the people around you to the point where you've kind of just lost yourself in the process? What's driving that? Listen, could it be that he brought you here to call you to go back? To go back to Jezreel, to go back and to recommit to returning to him, to recommit to taking time to just be with him this week. Yeah, this week, I'm not going to wait till next week. I'm not just going to keep running and just spinning my wheels. I'm tired of that. But this way, I'm going to commit to just take some time just to get alone with you, God. I'm going to take some time just to rest in that place of Jezreel, rest in the place of God's sowing, and just reap the benefits, and reap the blessing, and reap the encouragement, and reap the strength that's found only in time with you, God. And when we do that, again, what we find is when we take that time, when we return to God, we return to that place of grace, of not trying to live out of our own strength and live out of our own ability, but just rest in His. What we do is we find that strength again. We find that joy again. We find that perspective again. We rediscover the race that God's called us to run. There's enough in Elijah's life is that really he thought that race was all about him, but really when the passage says I want you to go back to Jezreel, but along the way he gives this list of people he wants Elijah to invest in, Elijah to pour into. One of those guys is Elisha, who would actually do twice as many things as Elijah. But listen, it never could have happened. God could have never used Elijah in the way he did, as long as he kept living at Mount Horeb. And the same goes for you. There's some things that wants to work in and through your life that I'm telling you, it can't happen at Mount Horeb. It only happens at Jezreel. It only happens when you learn, you quit the striving, you quit the running, and you learn to just rest in His grace and rest in who He says you are, which is that you are loved, you are chosen, you're a son, a daughter in Him. So there's nothing you can do to make Him love you any more or any less than He does right now. And so that's the hope, that's the challenge we walk out of here with tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand.